Buonasera a tutti, buonasera a tutte. Welcome to you all. Consentitemi di dare innanzitutto il benvenuto a Mark Bradford. È per noi un grandissimo piacere. Hello Mark, very happy to have you here with us. Io devo semplicemente salutarvi e dare il via a questa conversazione che fa parte di questa serie di conversazioni che facciamo con i nostri grandi artisti. Voglio solo ricordare due cose. La prima è che Mark, come tutti voi sapete, è l'artista selezionato dagli Stati Uniti alla Biennale di Venezia e io voglio anche sottolineare che il lavoro di Mark per la Biennale è stato anche un lavoro molto importante con una rete di cooperative sociali che lavorano nel carcere a Venezia. And I really want to underline this aspect of Mark Bradford's work. He's always been very much socially involved and engaged, and we really love this aspect of his identity, of his personality. Voglio ringraziare il presidente dell'American Academy per essere qui con noi oggi. È una ormai consuetudine per noi incontrarci in tante occasioni e vorrei ringraziare moltissimo per la loro presenza qui Pilar, Crespi e Steven per due motivi. Uno, perché sono dei grandi amici del MAXXI e quando sono qui con noi siamo felici, attraversano l'Atlantico ogni tanto, e soprattutto perché è grazie a loro che questa istituzione ha avuto in dono una grande e importantissima opera di Mark Bradford che oggi è entrata nella nostra collezione. Quindi thank you all for being here e buona conversazione al nostro direttore artistico Hou Hanru e a Mark Bradford. Please, the floor is yours. Pietro Marchi, il direttore di MAXXI Arte, scusa.
No. Grazie. Ormai hai detto tutto tu. Anche a me fa estremamente piacere welcome Mark, perché da quest'anno, dal 5 maggio, abbiamo fatto una grandissima operazione per rimettere al centro del museo proprio la collezione, con un nuovo allestimento e con spazi triplicati per ospitare la collezione, con una serie proprio molto attenta di percorsi tematici che aiutano e introducono il visitatore a quello che è appunto la nostra collezione sia di arte che di architettura, come potete vedere. Quindi per noi queste conversazioni con gli artisti sono estremamente importanti perché rendono la collezione una collezione viva, una collezione che tra i critici, i curatori, gli artisti e i vari professionisti del mondo dell'arte rendono sia il museo che la collezione un dispositivo dinamico per far vivere il museo e per renderlo sempre nuovo in qualche modo. Quindi sono estremamente felice, ringrazio anch'io l'ambasciata americana a Roma per questa collaborazione e l'Accademia americana assolutamente con cui abbiamo realizzato questo, abbiamo ormai una consuetudine direi di collaborazioni con gli artisti che passano all'Accademia, e anzi vorrei invitare Kim, la direttrice dell'American Academy, a fare un saluto a questo floor, please.
Anche io voglio ringraziare tutti i nostri partners e forse magari faccio la transizione a inglese perché questa conversazione sarà, mi pare, in inglese, right Mark? Actually, it's in Italian, we forgot to tell you. Thanks to Hanru for 3 years of fantastic collaborations. Bartolomeo, thank you so much for sharing the stage. Our partners and friends at the American Embassy, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to work with you. I want to particularly thank Kelly Degnan, the Charge d'Affaires, and her team, who have been our wonderful partners. For Mark Bradford, and there are many Marks in my introduction, for Mark Bradford and for many in this room, this event began over a year ago with preparations for Mark's project at the Biennale, and for the American Academy in Rome, this project also began more than a year ago when Mark Robbins, our president, went for a studio visit with Mark Bradford to talk about and to try to convince him to spend some time in Rome. And here he is. So all roads from Venice lead to Rome. The Academy is delighted and honored, as we always are, to be a partner both with the MAXXI and with Mark Bradford's visit to Rome, and to host him in an informal conversation with, at the Academy tomorrow as well. The Academy, for those of you who don't know, has been in Rome for over 100 years. It's an unusual community in that it involves collaboration across a huge range of disciplines. On the one hand, archaeologists, on the other hand, performance artists. And it's that aspect of the American Academy, I think, that makes us so proud to be here tonight with Mark Bradford, whose work also is an indagine through, in many of his canvases, actually through a kind of palimpsest of history and of ways of organizing knowledge. So the kinds of things that Mark does are the kinds of things the Academy both does, and I think Mark's work has realized we should also aspire to. So I am an archaeologist, and I find Mark's work actually understands better archaeology than we do, right? We think our job is to simply inquire about the palimpsest. Mark both excavated and destroys the palimpsest. He rips it apart in an attempt to get answers out of it, something that we do but don't like to admit. Interrogating and even eroding the past. And the huge scale at which he does it, I think, speaks to the courage with which he takes on this project. And of course, as Giovanna Melandri also said, communities and working with communities as the other hallmark of what Marx did, from South Los Angeles to the Rio Terra di Pensieri in Venice, working not about communities, but through communities and with communities, which I think is a fundamentally different thing, be those communities kindergarten teachers, the incarcerated, the orphaned, the forgotten. And Marx's vision of abstraction, therefore, I think is one in which abstraction is not the traditional definition of abstraction as a neutral blank slate, but a forum for social change. We are, I think, in a moment in which none of us can sit and engage in that old idea of abstraction as aloof and neutral and apart. We all have to engage, and we all have to take the best of who we are out into the world. Mark has really led the way, and I think Tomorrow's Another Day is not only an excavation and reanimation of this palimpsest of the past, it's an extended hand to the people of Venice, and above all, to those people at the margins. It's the kind of monumental and courageous work that all of us, as artists, as scholars, and us as institutions, have to aspire to. So with that, I want to thank all of you again and invite Hanru and Mark Bradford to the podium.
Okay. Buonasera. Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome. Well, it's been almost 20 years between him and me like this, I guess. Yeah. Yes. We met perhaps 20 years ago, at least. Mm-hmm. When he was younger, I was apparently also younger. But he...
Same height.
Yeah. He keeps growing. I, unfortunately, haven't grown 1 inch. So. Yeah. Well, welcome again to the MAXXI. Actually, it's, I think, our second conversation. Mm-hmm. The first one was on the occasion of the beautiful donation by Peter and Stephen of your work to the collection that was just mentioned. And now we have another chance to have you back. Very honored. And this is particularly important for us because I think we did a good choice to receive this donation without knowing that you would be representing the American Pavilion. And now we won the deal, actually. Right? It's a good investment.
Yeah. Stock goes.
Yeah. Well, it's not only a investment in terms of the collection, the value of the collection, but really intellectually for us. It's very important because I guess there's a very important change, I guess, in your work in for the project of the pavilion, that I think you develop a very interesting approach, which is emphasizing more on site-specific. I would not say simply the physical site, but also the global social sites. This pavilion happened in a very special moment, very specific moment, very challenging moment to renegotiate the meaning of this site, which is the American Pavilion in the Venice Biennale. And what does that mean to you?
Well, initially when I was awarded the pavilion, you can go to the next slide, I think it is, of the pavilion.
Use this.
Oh,
The green one.
my job, huh?
Yes. Well,
Okay. And the title of it was Tomorrow's Another Day. That was under Obama, and that was me at a time in America where there were a lot of protests against police violence. There were a lot of really protests in the streets, Black Lives Matter. And then I began to think about what it means to be African American by way of Europe. What do they understand about my culture? What do they understand? And oftentimes it's stereotypes through movies being the main carrier. So I thought Tomorrow's Another Day is the last line of Gone with the Wind. And Gone with the Wind is one of those movies that is one of the classics of America. Problematic racially in regards to especially African Americans, the big mammy, the sleepy black guy, the sassy. So I was really going to investigate race and representation through cinema. That was my initial idea. Well, I realized, and I was thinking about Reconstruction, that actually race relations and Reconstruction and the idea that we're going to have a different conversation. Well, November happened, and I realized that we were not in a reconstructive moment, but we were actually in collapse. And that became more immediate and more urgent. And I really built the whole kind of pavilion around the ideas of collapse and looking for, I started with kind of Greco-Roman mythology, the story of Hephaestus, and built it around that. The first thing that I was very much aware of, and I was always very much aware of, is that the site itself, the son of Jeffersonian architecture built based on Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's pavilion, Thomas Jefferson's plantation. For me, I had maybe a different relationship to this pavilion, just from my own personal history. So I think of Thomas Jefferson, and I just kind of thought of slaves and Sally Hemings. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to deal with the architecture, and the thing I wanted to erase was the national border. So I took all of the stones that they use for the Giardini to kind of design and make everything pretty, and I just ran it all the way up to the front. So I kind of erased it. I made my own kind of earthwork. I kind of erased the kind of presentation of that brickwork. I just kind of erased it. And an interesting thing that happened was people treated it like that. They put their cigarette butts out, they would put the coffee cups, and it became like a site. And that was kind of interesting to me. Moving into the first room, this takes up the whole room, and it's called Spoiled Foot. Spoiled Foot is based on Hephaestus. Hephaestus is the Greek god that I always liked because he wasn't born perfect. Hephaestus was born with a disability. There's two stories of Hephaestus. One is that he was cast out for his imperfection, or the other one is that he was protecting his mother from Zeus and was cast out and broke his foot. I like the second one more. I relate to that one more. So I wanted the viewer to have a relationship with their body, that you were pushed physically to the edges, that the center had collapsed. I wanted to use I really wanted to use the site and the architecture of the building. Oftentimes, a lot of what I saw after Hurricane Katrina in the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans was always that the architecture itself had collapsed, that there was a lot of collapsing ceilings. So I wanted the viewer to feel as if he was pushed to that the center was no longer available to him, that he had to get pushed to the sides and navigate in a landscape that was wild, full of possibility, but also dangerous. I experienced this idea of not being able to move to the center probably by the time I was 6. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the idea or something in America that we call the sissy. Sissy has nothing to do with homosexuality. Sissy just means, I looked it up, and it means unman. You're unmanly. And this idea that because you're unmanly, it has nothing to do with sexuality, there's something a little off about you, which means that you're not going to be as protected. It's the same thing when a girl, they say, oh, she's a little too grown, too fast, it's the same idea. So this idea of having to navigate around a site that's no longer able to move to the center is something that I experienced. So that's the first room. It's all built out of roofing materials and billboard that I find around the city, and it's a la Mark Bradford. Oh, we're going to go, let's see. Okay, well, we'll go here. Again.
There should be work before, right? There should be another work before.
No, this is the second room. If you look, there's in paper paintings. There are these very deep, kind of dark paintings. Again, I wanted to deal with this idea of modernism. That modernism was with these empty containers that existed, that had nothing to say. An abstraction, empty containers. That it was this internalized thing that you went into your studio, and it was void of anything to do with the world. For me, that was not the abstraction that I was interested in. Although we had unpacked it, in theory, had put it away, and painting was dead, I thought that that was a point of view. I felt like the same people that built it unpacked it and put it away. And I thought, well, what about women? What about people of color? So for me, abstraction became something that looked out instead of inward. I also wanted to play with the architecture of that sort of middle room and thinking about Angkor Wat, sort of that the jungle was taking back the architecture. So what I did in that rotunda is I kind of strangled the architecture with this kind of, these vines that kind of, and I made like a grotto, a kind of an experience of a grotto. And I wanted to, when you're standing in that grotto, everything is about ascension, looking up. I wanted people to have this feeling of looking up, because in religious paintings, you look up. So again, in the first room, I wanted you to have the physicality of not being able to move to the center. And again, I wanted you to have the feeling of looking up. But when you look up, I wanted the feeling of understanding that you were submerged, that it was subterranean, that you were not looking up at ascension and looking up at the biblical Christ of the kind of Renaissance, this idea of looking up at God who's above you, that I wanted you to feel that freedom was above you, that you were submerged in this subterranean space. I did that on site after I got there and decided that what I was proposing wasn't going to work. and I give myself permission to keep working. Let's see what oh, well, okay, well, we're gonna go backwards and forwards a little bit. So this is the Medusa room. So I made a series of very dark paintings which had to do with this kind of surface and stillness and repetition. And then I wanted to kind of, it felt too chapel-like, too perfect, too Rothko. And I didn't want that. I wanted something to point to something a little bit more mean or ugly or intense. And so I built this sculpture out of paper, the same paper that I always use, and I call it Medusa. If you look at the end paper paintings, they were something that I was textbook known for. Mark Bradford hair salon, using the materials from the hair salon. The narrative of the site became more important than the conversation about painting. That often happens with race. Oftentimes, they will ask people of color to describe the real narrative in a way in which we can understand it. And I always thought that race is complex, gender is complex, and there's no one way to do it. So I left that site very quickly because I kind of dug myself into a hole, even though it was natural, and it was I was simply trying to take materials that came from the world instead of from the art store. How can I interrogate something if I'm going to the same art store? And I thought, well, I'll take materials from the world. So Medusa and the end papers, and growing up in a hair salon where I thought all the women were Medusa. I mean, my mom and all the women, all I heard was strength. All I saw was strength, and all I saw was them pushing back against kind of male-dominated society. So I always thought that they were all Medusa. And I liked the idea of they were turning all the men to stone. I liked that idea. They would just look at them, you know, give them a look, and it was like, you know. So that was kind of, so I wanted to revisit that, just kind of talk about kind of an internalized rage and an externalized rage. I think that for me, being so gentle and sensitive, all bad things, by the way, when you were a kid, you internalize all that stuff because they are considered bad. And that's why I got the label sissy. He cries too much. He's sensitive. He doesn't like to fight. Well, you internalize those things. So for me, it's interesting is I wanted to have a relationship between something externalized, Medusa, living in her rage, and something internalized like a silent painting, like Still Waters Run Deep a little bit maybe. I guess yeah, okay. So,
a little question. What do you...
We can talk, I'll go back to the paintings too.
Maybe paintings, yeah.
I'm just showing just kind of basic kind of philosophical ideas about painting in this room. There were 3 paintings. They were cellular. Again, I was always talking about architecture, sort of biological architecture, architecture of the site, and also the architecture of painting. So being interested in abstraction, I love the idea of the pure, the top of the food chain, the historical abstract expression from 1950s New York, the big cowboys, the white big men who rode in on their big horses and took the... I just thought, well, that's interesting. I need to take my black self in there and make it more kind of less pure. So this idea of something that's less pure, something that's tainted, something that we have a saying, a fly in the buttermilk. So this idea also of cellular, a cell that regenerates can either regenerate a body or degenerate. So so I played a lot with cellular. The play was cellular as the body being an architecture of some of the thoughts about modernism, and also the body being something, the physicality of the space and how people move through it were also some of the things that I was thinking of. And I think I wanted people to experience their body as if I experience so much of my body all the time, because I'm so much aware of it moving through space. and how much space to take up. Even if I point, it's kind of like, if I point, I'm gonna like smack who, like bam, you know. So this idea of being very present in the body and of what the cellular structure and the idea of modernism and painting and pollution and where material comes from.
Well, before you talk about your social actions, I have a question. How do you relate yourself to other, let's say, African American artists who are somehow sharing the same struggle, but maybe in different languages, different way of making things? How to relate it to?
I think in some ways African American artists, or you can say people of color, even sometimes you can even say women, it is just simply pushing back against easy equations. It's simply saying that it's just complex, simply complexity. But it's easier sometimes because the idea of complexity is easier sometimes in where that idea exists. So if, unfortunately, like if tomorrow's another day, if you only understand that culture through stereotypes, it's very difficult to think of that group as being complex because they understand that culture only through stereotypes. So I think that people are just simply struggling for a complex conversation. I never have a problem with an all-black group of people. What I struggle with is how they reduce the conversation down to one or two things.
Yeah.
So, but I think that that's changing. It has to change for contemporary art to move forward into the 21st century. It can't be reduced down. The internet is the worst for flattening everyone down. So,
do you think being, you know, from this background or somehow, well, very complex, but somehow, you know, being labeled in a way, does that push you to be more sensitive to social actions?
does it push me to be more sensitive? I think that I was so aware, because I went to school so much later, I only lived in conservative America. I didn't know anything about liberal anything. I didn't know there was another site. I knew one site, traditional black America and traditional white America. I never knew. So whatever navigating I was doing, it was in that conservative site. I knew that I was maybe a little bit other, but I was within that site. I fell through the cracks within that site. I struggled for acceptance within that site. I looked around and thought, there's got to be somebody around here who thinks like I do in that site. Isolation in that site. So the activist work was very natural to me because I simply understood that why wasn't I exposed to contemporary ideas at 11? Because they weren't in my local neighborhood. Why wasn't I exposed to progressive ideas? Because they weren't in my neighborhood. And why do we have to get on a bus and go to another part of town to hear progressive ideas? And that's all I learned when I was in school. I got to Cal Arts and I thought, wow, what is this? Progressive. I'd go home and tell my mom, she's like, yeah, whatever. You know, I was just different, but within that conservative site. So I began to think, well, I think contemporary ideas are very interesting, but we need to share them a little more. We need to get out of our little bubble here with these ideas. We need to take them on the road a little bit and have other communities debate them.
And then, well, after these years, especially recently, you kind of become successful in terms of institutional appearance and also in the market. Yeah. And also in, you know, you work with one of the biggest galleries and also you have great collectors, a lot of people follow your work and so on. And is that also a complicated situation that makes you feel that you have to preserve certain things? You have to deal with this maybe a friction between your social activist aspect and the comfort zone of being successful.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's like, it's not even a friction for me, and it's not even complicated. It's not complicated. It's complex. From 12 years old, till I was 12 years old, I lived in all-black Los Angeles. And then at 12 years old, my mother moved me to a suburb, which is Santa Monica, which is on the beach, all white. And every day or whenever I felt like it, I would go from all white to all black. And she would drive from all black to all white. Now, on the way, in the car, I never heard my mother say, now when we go to that all white part of town, this is going to be a problem. And then when you go to the all black part of town, there's going to be a problem. Never heard that. So for me, I always felt that whatever site I was in would welcome me. So I never had a problem with that. I don't have a problem with having more money than I had before. I just choose to move and do certain things with it. But no, I don't have I think it's romantic, these romantic ideas. I think we're all in bed together. I mean, really, we're all in bed together, you know. So
then, less romantic. Talk about your art and practice project and the social interventions.
So this is Leimert Park, which is in South Central, but it's a very working class part of South Central. My mother had her last hair salon here. My mom was a hairstylist for probably 30 years, 30, 40 years, I'm not sure, something like that. I was a hairstylist for 20 years. We had 3 hair salons. This is the last hair salon in Leimert Park. This is not the foundation. This will be a co-op, actually, the foster youth will run. But so I'll talk a little bit about the exhibition space. And so again, this is our exhibition space that used to be where we would get the materials to work in the hair salon. So this was the beauty supply where we would run across and get the materials. So now we have contemporary art shows. This is Fred Eversley, who is an African-American abstract sculpture. And it's great because it's in the local neighborhood, and half the people come in and they say, this is not black art. And I say, well, he's black, and this is art. I love to push back against easy equations. This is what it's for. And they come in and they debate, and some people say, I understand it. Some people say, I don't like it. Some people say, this is white people's art. Some people say this is, there are all kinds of things, but it's interesting because it is in the local community and they can debate it. And that's all I'm asking, is that more people should be able to have access to debate it. That's it. Some get it. Some say, this is black art. I can see a black face in one of these things. I say, okay. All right. But I love the fact, and we put up banners sometimes, and one of the curators of one of the shows said, you know, I don't like you use the picture of the artist and the artwork. And I said, yes, because it's very important that they understand that it's an African-American person. They said, well, that's not necessary. And I said, well, for you it's not necessary, and for your community, but for this community, I want them to understand that, yes, this is an African-American, and yes, this is his art, and no, it doesn't look like black art. These are important things for me. This is a show, the show we have up, and everyone comes. Fred Eversley, he's passed away. He was an abstract sort of collage of the 1950s and 60s. Did not get his due. They're going back and rethinking about a lot of these artists. And this is interesting because now I have two arms. I have the art and practice. I think that it's great to give access to contemporary art, but what about need? Like, what about the need? There's a high density of foster youth, which means children who don't have mothers or fathers in this neighborhood. And so by addressing and working with that local community and working with these young people who are in this system, it's addressing a local need as well. We work with about 150, we've worked with about 150 youth, job training, job placement, high school diploma, and mental health. Those are our 4 arms that we do. This was my old studio space. I've moved. This is one of the classes. They come in every month. So we have 10 to 15 that rotate every month for 2 years. They're in the program for 2 years. Mainly African American, more women than men. This is something that we've also developed. We've developed an app. Many people in the foster care system lose track of their siblings, their brothers and sisters, and we've developed an app that if they download the information in all of the places that they've lived, they will find matches. And of course that comes out of my love of cartography and mapping, and it comes out of my, but this is an app that I helped develop, that I did develop with developers, and it's not to make money, it's actually to deal with that specific constituency. Also jobs. Jobs are a cornerstone of what I do. Because without a job, with a job you can get a place to live. With a place to live, you can go back to school. Going back to school, you can reach higher. So it's almost like the cornerstone. So we hire quite a few, and the reason why we want to open a co-op is so that we can have more jobs. Because there's something that happens to people when you show up every day for the job. It's a built-in structure.
And how does it work in terms of organization? You and a group of regular partners, or
the museum side, we partner. We always partner because you don't know everything. Go to an expert. So we would go to Huan, you would go to you, we would partner with you, and you would program the exhibitions. We work with a foster youth organization, we partner with them. I'm like the conduit. I raise the money, I get the word out, I give some point of view, but I let you do your thing. So it's not like, you can't do everything. This is, I guess, Rio Terra, the project I work with here. Again, I am very job. I think because I was from mercantile, I think I came from a mercantile background, so self-sufficiency and hard work can take you from point A to point B. Yeah. And so this is, they make products. And this is very interesting. The director allows them to sell the organic produce in front of the prison every Saturday, and the whole community embraces it, and the whole community buys from them. It gives a face. I mean, this idea of a face, and this idea of sustainability, and that's all they're really asking for. They were very clear as they wanted a face. They wanted a face and for people to understand what they would do. They also make sort of organic products. They also did a limited edition bag with my artwork on it. And so they were very clear that they wanted a space. And we have a 6-year kind of commitment. This is the first year we signed a 6-year lease. First year, landlords. Second year, expanding the program. And I listen to their needs. It's very important that when you're dealing with communities of need, you have to learn to step back and listen. This is the store. It's amazing. And they're so proud of it. I think all of Venice came to the opening. It was incredible. And yeah, and not only did all of Venice come to the opening, but the young man in the front, Pietro, if you notice, that was him doing the silk screening. He was paroled. He's now working inside of my pavilion in Venice, and then he will work in the store. So this kind of idea that culture and this idea of access and class and background, it can become much more complex. And these are the kind of things I'm interested in, is the complexity of it and the transparency of it. Oh, that's it.
But let's go back to how to start it in Venice. You said the 6 years project,
Yeah.
right? And you started together when you were invited to do the pavilion.
Yes, I was invited to do the pavilion, but it's interesting. I have to admit, I'm gonna give a shout out to the State Department. They were really like, it was kind of funny because they were like, yeah, it's great, you're gonna do the pavilion, we love your work, but what about that other stuff you do? And I was like, really? So it was interesting because it felt like they wanted both, not like it's like this little side project. So I was like, well, I can, you give me an inch. I'm like, woof. And so I wandered around. But what's very comfortable for me is before I became in the art world, before I went to art school, I was just a regular person, a hairdresser. So I can just fall back into society very easy. And that's what I did. I just kind of fell back into society and listened and kept walking around, and I found someone, Agata, who speaks the language, and we just kept going around until I hit a program that needed help, needed money, and needed visibility, and that was serious. And the rest is just easy in a way, because you get out of the way. You have to be discreet. It's really like discreet. And you come forward when they need for you to come forward, and you relax when they come. Because I was very, very nervous about Pietro working in the pavilion. I felt that he would become this kind of specimen. But they said, no, it's a good thing. I would always ask them, do you think this is a good idea? Or do you think this is a good idea? And I think that, no, I don't. It was very successful.
Well, I know that you don't like comparison, but it's okay. I still want to compare because.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Do you think this kind of actions would influence directly your own work? Like, for example, I don't know, Theater Gate did this community project, and he ended up doing his own objects that using these materials from this community building materials and so on.
No, that's not, no. 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 I'm the opposite. I started with abstraction because for me, I needed a space to interrogate ideas and work out things in silence. I was so tired. I didn't even know how I felt. Listen, June 5th, 1981 was the first time that the CDC, Center for Disease Control, identified 5 cases of pneumonia, of cystis pneumonia, of carposis, 5. I was 18. My life spiraled out of control because how can you be 18 and bury 75 to 80% of the people that you know? It was being old and young at the same time. So I was completely turned around, haunted, running, trying to survive with the Grim Reaper. So the first time I slowed down was in art school, just to kind of learn and kind of get an MFA and be fancy. I got in the studio, That was the first time in my life I relaxed enough to unpack. An abstraction for me was silence, to unpack in my own time. The fast forward to art and practice, to Rio Terra, to all the other kind of site-specific works that I've done, I feel like that gives the context to the paintings. Oh, okay, now I see where some of this stuff comes from. Because I had a really non-willingness to talk about it. I kind of would just put it up there and say, oh, I'm not going to talk about it. The social work informs the paintings. The paintings can only inform art history, really. I mean, that's what they do, the history of painting. The social work. So now I'm actually revealing through the social work where a lot of stuff comes from, where the urgency and where the intensity and the cuttings and the, like I love what she said about palimpsest, of breaking open the palimpsest, you know, like interrogating the palimpsest, not just, you know, palimpsest is kind of one on top of another, and a lot of times palimpsest has to do with language. No, I like, you know, it's more aggressive in the way that I understand it. It's like, it's war. The palimpsest of war, really. It's like Rome. First there was one Rome, and then someone conquered it and built on top, and then someone else conquered it and built on top. It's blood. It's not polite. Power, excuse me, do you mind if I take over your country? Yes, you can take over my country. It doesn't work that way. So I like this kind of, the palimpsest of war. So today I was in the men's prison, and very easy for me to fall into having a conversation. I remember what it feels like to feel desperate and to have no access and just be full of need. So the social projects is marked before I went to school. And it wasn't that long ago. I didn't start school until I was 30. I didn't graduate until I was 37, 38. I really didn't start my career until I was 40. So I had a long time to be in conservative land. Conservative landia.
So now you're walking away like your friend in your video to somewhere. What is somewhere?
I mean, tomorrow's another day. You can take it however. For me, tomorrow's another day is we have the possibility. We have a possibility. There's always, as long as you're breathing, you have a possibility. If you can stay on the planet, you have a possibility. And it's interesting is because when the kind of new administration came, this was the first time I can remember reporting and reporters asking me more national questions than race questions. Which is interesting because I think in America we're beginning to have national conversations, which is super healthy. What does it mean to be a North American? Instead of, well, how does it feel to be the black man representing the United States? I was waiting, I was like, oh man, what? We're having national conversations. For me, it was quite easy because I felt in some ways people wanted to turn me into an object of an administration, and I would just say, no, this is a subject. And I will navigate the pavilion like I've navigated everything else and not become a spokesman or an object for a mouthpiece for something. But it was interesting. I think it's very healthy. The conversations that we're having in North America and the fights that we're having and the disagreements that we're having. And you lift up a rock and things come out that you didn't know were under there, but they need to get out. So tomorrow's another day.
So now we have a few minutes to take some questions. Le domande.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one. Irene. C'è una domanda qua. One second.
Do you have any difference between your performance work and your collage work? Do you see any? Because I know there's one piece you have at the Wachowski collection in Dallas that it's a performance piece based off of Eddie Murphy kind of stand-up comedy. And how big of a different approach do you take with that?
Yeah. The performance work and the video work, I noticed, hit harder. I would say they're more direct. So the piece that he's describing is a piece called Spider-Man. I always love these. You ever seen little children running around with the Superman or Spider-Man costume, and they're just like, I'm Spider-Man. So this idea of kind of vulnerability and kind of wanting to be heroic at the same time. But this is really, I become a stand-up comedian, and it's a black screen, so the body is not there. But what you hear in the subtitle, or it's subtitled. It sounds like a stand-up and the laughing, but I find comics to be very mean. And I find that generally most comics tend to target the same thing over and over again. Let's see, women, gay people, women, gay people. It's like boring. It's like the same stuff over and over and over and over again. Well, I remember when Eddie Murphy in the early 80s did a piece. It was really interesting. It was about no faggots and this and faggots that. I didn't really care about that because it was 1982 and 1983 and people were already dying. But what I was fascinated by is I was in the amphitheater. I was fascinated by how everybody laughed. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. This has become socially acceptable. What I'm always fascinated by is when does a word become socially acceptable? Because because we all know that for a long time it was not acceptable to call a woman a bitch. And then one day, I don't know what happens, I guess it's in the zeitgeist it becomes okay. I'm always fascinated when it goes from being a taboo to being part of the social contract. And that moment, I felt I was experiencing that. So I wanted to kind of go back to that site. I mean, there are so many words in the social contract that are completely acceptable to describe women in the most base way. In lyrics, oh my God. But they're socially acceptable. I'm always wondering, when did that hoe, bitch, stripper, I mean, when do they become not taboo and part of the social contract? I'm always fascinated more. I mean, we're constantly, same thing with, I suppose nigger would be from rap. It became socially acceptable. If you were African American, to use that word, I just don't think the word should ever be used. You can't erase the history of that word. So I'm just always fascinated when they move into the social contract. There's another word now, it's interesting. The young people will say, oh, just stop acting like a fag. It doesn't mean what it meant. It's just part of the social contract. It just fascinates me. It's just fascinating to me.
Well, maybe a very, I don't know, irrelevant question. What do you think of this latest incident in the Whitney Biennial about the painting by Donald Schultz, that some artists accuse that, you know, a black subject should not be represented by a non-black artist?
I think that that's a complicated argument. I think, first of all, I would say, where's the curator? Secondly, I think that we have to agree that there are spaces that we interrogate ideas, that we move them around, that they're not just essential. And I believe that that's what that space was for. When things jump the rail and become part of another conversation, that's problematic. And that's no getting the cow back in the barn.
More questions?
Hi, Mark. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I have a question about race relations. I saw this, it was a BBC documentary recently about race relations in America, and it was making a comparison between Germany, where German people are made to confront the past with Nazis, the Nazi Party, and the Holocaust on a constant basis, but in certain parts of the United States, like in the Deep South, places that used to be slave markets aren't marked. The history's been erased from the memories of a lot of people. So, as an artist, how do you think that you can address this issue and make people more aware of this conversation that they may not be having, especially in the areas where people have a different version of histories with regard to the Civil War, for example?
I don't. I mean, that's a big topic. I think every artist of color or every black person, they have to kind of decide what their kind of work, what there's going to be their site of investigation. I think that with, I call those like mountaintop ideas. The best thing that you can do with those is to make the problem transparent. Does that make a sense to you? Like, it is not the land of the free. That's kind of a quality of North America. But an artist doesn't really, I don't believe that the artist has the responsibility if that's not his work. There will be some artists that will address that directly, and then there will be some artists that will have a very hermetic, conceptual practice that has nothing to do with that, and be African American. And that's what I was saying about complexity. This is where it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. Even everybody in here just got a little quiet too, like, uh-oh, that's... And the reason why we get quiet is because I'm saying that an African American doesn't have the responsibility to talk about that history in his work if he doesn't choose it. I think complexity is always with a little bit of a threat of violence. Because that space, if you move into conversations that are new, it can trip into a Dana Schutz conversation. New is always dangerous. That's the best way I could describe that. Did that help? You're like, not really, but... that's the best way that I could answer that question.
Mark has a question.
Yeah. I said you're real smart. You're going to be like...
No. Thank you so much.
Aries.
Thank you so much. It was great to see the work. And I think what you're speaking about is really the ability to choose the kind of work that you want to do, which is seen as a luxury. It's a luxury, as you suggest, of access. So to be able to choose abstraction as your mode of work, but also to bring it together with practice out in the world is an unusual combination because one doesn't expect abstraction to have this role in the world. In some ways, abstraction is supported because it was seen as neutral and wouldn't call into question the values of society the way figurative work could much more clearly. So there's an interesting kind of relationship between the work that you do out in the world and your abstraction, and I wonder if you can say a little bit more about the resistance you might have found working in both modes simultaneously, and what it was like for you outside of Los Angeles working with other communities, which were in fact less familiar to you?
Oh yeah, I get please resistance. I get that all the time. Or the people just want easy equations, things that they can understand. A equals B and B equals C, but that's not really how life works, really. And I also think that when I say artist is citizen, I mean that artists have probably always been citizens. Most artists, many artists that work engages in ideas of our time, many. So I don't even know what they're talking about, the art bubble or the art world. Many artists engage in that. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to be, the contemporary artist doesn't seem to be asked always to the party. The sports person is asked the sports person is asked, well, what do you think about the current situation? The film person, what do you think about the reality star? But never the contemporary artist. It seems like we're never invited to that party. Well, I think we should be invited to that party. We should sit next to, if they ask Kim Kardashian, what does she think? Well, they certainly should ask a contemporary artist what they think. So, like, a lot more. So, but what I guess it's talking about is people want to make it a problem, but it's not a problem for me. So, again, yes, this abstraction that I was very clear, and it was a political gesture to do abstraction. And to really try to unpack that history of I understood why we sold it 1950s to the world. 1950 America, and abstraction was quote unquote empty of politics. Well, me being African American, 1950 America was a hot topic. I mean, we were Jackson Pollock on the cover of Life magazine is only 3 years after or before Emmett Till, who was killed and really started a lot of the whole early civil rights movement, which again, Dana Schutz that was her piece was about Emmett Till's casket, the open casket of Emmett Till. So I was very conscious politically that I wanted to do that. I didn't know if there was an audience for it, but I was very clear. Outside of the US and working in Italy, I've actually found almost no resistance. It's actually been easier. Maybe because it's not my context, maybe because I'm other here, I'm not Italian. So that site is it's a little bit easier. In the U.S., I think people might have more problems with it, but I never asked them their opinion. I think the best way to kind of do what you want to do is just don't ask a lot of opinions. Just do it. And then you don't have to get slowed down by, Mark, I really do have a problem with you because... So I never thought it hadn't been done before. I never thought that it was a paradox. I didn't think, maybe I was too naive. I went to school at 30. I got it at 37, 40. I was almost 40. I never thought, I was too old. I just don't think maybe I was too naive. So now, moving forward, I just simply make work out of my desires. And the things that I'm interested in are the things I'm interested in. And I kind of leave it there. And so I try to be very transparent as to where I am economically, who paid for what. I'll say, yes, I funded Rio Terra. Because I'm not the same artist as I was 20 years ago. So why not kind of, and I change and I evolve and I back up and I say, that didn't work. And I don't mind being transparent about the whole project. And when I say oops, and that was a mistake. I leave enough fluidity in my practice for the complexity. Because I know I can be a bit much sometimes. But I leave enough room for that. When I got to the pavilion and I decided to change the rotunda, the catalog was printed, the brochures were printed, and I just thought, sorry, got to do what I got to do. But I understand when people bring me easy equations. Your paintings make this much. Social practice means this. You were I need to have it. I need to make it problematic. It's just not a problem for me. I do have problems, but this is not one of them. So I think people want me to have a problem with things that I don't have a problem with. And the things that I have a problem with, I think sometimes people go, why do you have a problem with that? So when it's a problem, I say it's a problem. But when it's not, it's just not a problem. It goes back to when I was a kid and I lived on the beach. And then we go in the all-black hair. So it really wasn't a problem. But sometimes reporters would ask me, well, how did that feel going between those two sites, one all black and one all white? It felt about 30 minutes in a car. 30 minutes. It's interesting because I had to say that my mom was kind of like a hippie because I never had a word for my mother. She was non-traditional, but in an all-conservative site, there wasn't a name. So to make kind of white people understand, she's kind of like a hippie. But she was just non-traditional in a conservative site. So again, when things are a problem, I let you know when they're a problem, and when they're not, they're not. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Okay.
I saw Michael over there too.
Last question. Michael has a question.
See Michael, see now?
I have a comment.
I've known him for like ever. He was like 12 years old. He still looks like it's all that
You
gray
still
hair.
look like. Anyways, I don't have a question. I have a comment. I'm sitting here just so proud of you and so inspired as a fellow artist. And I was telling my girlfriend Anna here about us and how we see each other every 10 years or something, and how you're always like, every time I see you, you're just kind of doing your thing. You just. I don't see you, but when I see you, I'm just like, yeah, you're doing your own thing, and I respect what you're talking about, this sense of complexity, and I feel like as alumni of the Studio Museum, which is a place that fosters this idea of complexity, an idea of a broader sense of what it means to be Black, what it means to be Latino, what it means to be all these things. I'm just inspired that you are sort of taking the lead and actually actualizing that in Los Angeles. And anyways, we can talk later.
Oh, well, see, that to me is what it's about. Like, that for me is what it's about. That, like, it's showing, that's it, just complexity. Like, sorry, people, I know you want the easier, it's like, oh, really? But that idea of complexity, I think that is what will change the conversations, that will move the conversations forward in the 21st century, because they have to move forward. And we have to allow for the complexity. And unfortunately, complexity also has a built-in unknown part. And we're going to have to be okay with that too. It's like right now, people are obsessed with wanting to know where we're going. And Mark, where are we going? People are sitting, well, do you think? I said, you know what? You're just going to have to just embrace the ride. Right now, the ground's moving. The ground's moving. And you're just going to have to just let it move for a while. It'll stop shaking eventually, but it is shaking right now. And so even in my own practice, I'll work for a while, and then I'll push off. I'll say, there you go again, Mark. You're going into those uncharted territories. Why don't you stay on land a little bit more? You get a little more. But it's just kind of embracing both. And so what I made the work out of and what I made the whole pavilion out of was the ground was moving. It was shaking. And I just kind of rolled with it. And so we're all just going to roll with it.
Great, thank you. Let's roll with you too.